Tianbao Fu Yao Lu. Chapter 200. A Riddle of an Origin. The sun rose, and the caravan had been scattered every which way by the elephant herd, and the ground was littered with debris. Because of Ashinakayang's decision, the merchants had all managed to escape with their lives. During the night, they had hidden themselves behind a large rock, and had actually remained uninjured. When Hung Jun's group arrived at the camp that they had set up last night, they realized that there was another group there, another caravan of merchants who had also set out from Yuzhou. The second caravan was currently helping the first caravan's merchants take stock of their goods and organize their carts, bringing back all the camels that had fled out of fright. Hung Jun watched Chen Feng, not saying a single word. The group had originally believed that Chen Feng would have obediently remained in Yuzhou. None of them had expected him to sneak into another caravan and follow after them. "You're looking for trouble." Hung Jun scolded him. "What if you didn't end up going to the same place we did?" Chen Feng replied, "There's only this one Silk Road. So, if I couldn't find you, I would have followed another caravan back instead and gone back to Chang'an." After this caravan had set off, they had brought Chen Feng along as they journeyed north and westward, keeping at a pace that perfectly lagged one day behind the exorcists as they traveled. Despite his small size, Chen Feng was very mischievous, and when the merchants found him, they were no longer able to spare a set of hands to send him back to Yuzhou. Moreover, he had mentioned Li Jinglong's name in passing, so the merchants had no choice but to write a letter to send back to the merchant guild via the way stations as they brought him along on their journey. Qiu Yangxi, on the other hand, was still studying that silver-armored warrior, as if he was trying to figure out where he had come from. "His name is Yuzhou," Chen Feng said, tugging at the hem of Hung Jun's robe. He then said to that silver warrior, "He's Hung Jun." Under the sunlight, Hung Jun could finally see this person clearly. The first impression this warrior named Yuzhou made on him was that he was built very well, his armor exposing the muscles of his body. His abs were very well defined and neat, and he was wearing a pair of dark blue martial pants that had a narrow waist, flattering the length of his legs. He stood there, looking tall and handsome. Based on Tang customs, if he left his chest bare and walked through the streets of Chang'an, he would definitely attract the titters and leers of countless young ladies. Comparatively, Lu Su was skinnier than him, and Qiu Yangxi was more toned. Li Jinglong was about even with him in terms of his looks, but he was missing some of that indescribable bearing. This person's physique seemed to have been chiseled by the creator himself, and despite the mask he had on, it felt as if he had the air of a warrior god. The silver-armored warrior had been studying Hung Jun this entire time, and Ashinakayan grew unhappy with that, saying, "What are you constantly staring at him for?" The silver-armored warrior suddenly remarked, "I've discovered that Hung Jun is not very tall." Hung Jun, who greeted people like this when they first met. Hung Jun really had no way to respond to that. Though he could not compare to Li Jinglong and Qiu Yangxi, he was still well over 7 chi tall. He wasn't short at all. "Okay." Qiu Yangxi said, "Since we are friends, why keep the mask on and hide your face from us?" Hung Jun was just about to stop Qiu Yangxi. After all, since this person was wearing a mask, he must have had a reason for doing so. Maybe he had a scar on his face. Yuzhou looked at the gathered group for a moment, before he lifted his index and middle fingers, pinched the mask, and lifted it off. With a shake of his hand, the mask vanished in a swirl of light. Hung Jun, Lu Su, Qiu Yangxi, and Ashinakayan all startled at that. The saying, "a man of handsome appearance, with a dapper air about him," was perfect for describing this person. Yuzhou's eyes and brows were sharp and well defined, and his skin was fair. He looked as if he was no more than 20-some years old, and he inspired awe. Yuzhou nodded at them. Hung Jun searched his thoughts for a moment, before saying, "Thank you for looking after Chen Feng." "No need for thanks," Yuzhou replied simply, before leaving the camp and sitting down on a cart, staring silently into the distance. This person's identity was a mystery, and he was reserved to boot. Hung Jun didn't know how to interact with him, so he glanced towards Chu Yangxi. Chu Yangxi frowned for a long time, before saying, "Let's prepare to set out first and deal with everything else later. Zhenji will probably come back soon to meet up with us anyways." The caravan had suffered heavy losses, but thankfully, no one was injured. The two caravans merged into one, and they prepared to set out as quickly as possible. They would head along the later section of the Silk Road towards Talas, preparing to replenish their horses and camels after they arrived there. At the end of the procession was a huge burlap bag, which contained the drought fiend trussed up with the Yao binding rope. Chu Yangxi had also covered the outside of the bag with talismans. All of these troubles had to be dealt with, one by one, so Chu Yangxi decided to let the drought fiend sleep for a while first. After they met up with Li Jinglong, they would then deal with him then. Lu Su used the power of the dreamscape to make him fall asleep, and Chu Yangxi had then used the talismans to prevent him from escaping. With the addition of the Yao binding rope, that was 3 layers of locks, so there was no way the drought fiend would be able to run away. The caravan set off, and Hung Jun told Chen Feng to scram onto one of the carts. He was currently agonizing over what to do with this brat. There was no way he could bring him to Talas to fight. Chen Feng had run around for a whole night, and he was completely exhausted, so he curled up in the very inside of the horse cart and fell asleep right away. Chu Yangxi quietly whispered to Hung Jun, "Go see if you can get some information out of Yu Zhou about his origins." Hung Jun replied, "Can I get any information out of him? I always feel like other people end up getting information out of me instead." "Go," Chu Yangxi said. "The way he looks at you is a little weird. He's not a mortal, so you should go ask him what he is." Hung Jun replied, "Maybe he's a Yaoguai." "Such things as experts don't appear out of thin air," Lu Su said. "Could he be some Yao King? Or maybe he's actually the drought fiend. What if the drought fiend is actually 2 brothers?" Hung Jun thought for a bit, before he climbed onto the cart. The rest of them also climbed onto the cart to rest. After busying themselves for the entire night, they were all tired as well. The horse cart swayed as it moved along, and Chen Feng was soundly asleep. Yu Zhou had one leg propped up on the cart shaft, while his other one was curled up under him as he looked back at the road they had taken when they were coming. When he saw Hung Jun coming towards him, however, he reached out and helped him up onto the cart. "Hung Jun, thanks." "No need for thanks," Yu Zhou replied. Hung Jun found that this warrior always seemed very well-mannered. Even if they were just polite phrases, his way of saying them made his listeners feel warm and comfortable. The two of them were silent for a moment, each of them sitting to one side of the cart, while large bolts of silk were piled next to them. "When did you join up with the caravan?" Hung Jun couldn't resist asking. "Yu Zhou, the Jiao Pass." Hung Jun nodded at that. Yu Zhou studied Hung Jun quietly, making Hung Jun feel a little abashed. "Does Yu Xiang know my father?" Hung Jun asked. "I don't know him," Yu Zhou replied. Hung Jun was caught wrong-footed at that, and he had no choice but to smile and nod. Yu Zhou looked away, and Hung Jun continued, "Why did you save us?" "Your adopted son told me to go." Yu Zhou met Hung Jun's gaze again. "The little guy's pretty cute. We are indebted to you." Hung Jun couldn't help the chill he felt. If Yu Zhou hadn't been there, they might not have been corpses strewn across the ground, but they would have definitely not been able to avoid heavy injuries. "No need." Yu Zhou cupped his hands again. "When did that person join the caravan?" On another cart, Chu Yangxi asked the leader of the caravan. "The Jiao Pass," the caravan leader replied. "He said that he would tag along with our carts for this trip, and he even gave us gold for it. See, look, here's the gold that he paid." And saying that, he pointed out those pieces of gold. Chu Yangxi took them and hefted them. These gold pieces had an excellent luster to them, and only royal families could have access to them. Who exactly was this person? Qiu Yangxi was filled with questions as he looked towards Hung Jun and Yu Zhou, currently chatting away on another cart. He glanced at the steel claw he had set to one side as he constantly tried to guess at his origins. Hung Jun asked, "Are you a Yaoguai? Is it important whether I'm a Yao or a human?" Yu Zhou asked in reply. When Hung Jun thought about it, he agreed, and with a smile he let it go. Afterwards, however, he realized that something wasn't right. He was evidently here to try and get some information out of Yu Zhou. With that, he said, "Then you're a Yao." "Yu Zhou, I am whatever you want me to be." Hung Jun face-palmed. "I'm a peacock." "What are you?" Hung Jun asked. "Yu Zhou, I know you are a peacock." "I am Yu Zhou. I am just me." Hung Jun couldn't get the information that Qiu Yangxi wanted at all, so he had no choice but to give up. "All right then. Can I see your weapon?" Hung Jun hurried to nod and take the steel claw. That steel claw looked like a dragon claw, and it was very sharp. Yu Zhou added, "Careful that you don't cut yourself on it." After Hung Jun looked it over, he couldn't figure out the origins of this weapon, so he had to let that go as well. He was trying to think of a few things to say, only for Yu Zhou to suggest, "You're tired, so you should sleep first." "I'll keep watch." Hung Jun yawned. He was in fact tired. He and Lu Su had spent the past several days caring for Ashina Kayang in rotation, so they hadn't slept very much, and he had spent all of last night running around as well. With that, he wrapped his robes around himself and lay down in the cart. Yu Zhou pulled over a rug and draped it over him, saying, "If something happens, I'll call for you." The horse cart swayed as it moved along, and very quickly, Hung Jun fell asleep. After an indeterminate length of time, he suddenly heard a bird's cry, so he opened his eyes, rubbed them, and sat up. The sun had slowly sunk westward. A white falcon landed at the back of the cart, only to see Yu Zhou put on the steel claws and watch that white falcon warily, not letting it approach. "It's on our side," Hung Jun hurriedly said. He untied a small piece of cloth from the white falcon's leg. On it was a simple map, which sketched out a valley. "It's news from Jinglong." Hung Jun glanced at Yu Zhou, before he hurried to call for Qiu Yangxi. The caravan temporarily halted, and everyone studied the cloth for a moment, before Qiu Yangxi said, "We'll have to leave the caravan behind and head out on our own towards the river valley to the northwest of Talas to meet up with them." And with that, the caravan bid them farewell. Qiu Yangxi borrowed several camels from the merchants, before tying the burlap sack with the drought fiend in it onto one. They then headed towards the location the map had pointed out. Yu Zhou, however, also got off and stood to one side. Just as Hung Jun was about to ask Yu Zhou to bring Chen Feng to Talas and find somewhere safe for them to stay, Yu Zhou spoke. "I'm going with you guys." Hung Jun said, "Feng Er, he. Let's all go together. Bring Feng Er along." Qiu Yangxi interrupted Hung Jun and sent him a meaningful glance. Hung Jun didn't understand what he was trying to say. In reality, most of the people in the exorcism department used their glances to convey their meaning, but Hung Jun was often the one who didn't understand. He didn't ask anything, however, and simply nodded. So with that, Lu Su led Ashina Kayang, Qiu Yangxi, Hung Jun, and Chen Feng along on camels. Yu Zhou's camel followed behind, dragging the sand cart along behind it. The drought fiend was trussed up on the cart, and they all headed towards the meeting point that Li Jinglong had pointed out earlier. Seeing that Hung Jun was riding behind himself, Qiu Yangxi couldn't resist turning back to look at him. He also asked, "Do you know why he's coming with us?" Hung Jun shook his head, so Qiu Yangxi explained, "He's afraid that we'll be in danger if we get ambushed again." When the white falcon came with the news, he was staring the entire time at the falcon and at the map in my hands, as if he was thinking. Hung Jun was surprised that Qiu Yangxi would think of so many details, and he responded, that shouldn't be the case. Jinglong is with Zhengur. I've already made the arrangements, Qiu Yangxi said. Lu Su is prepared for a counter-ambush at any point. The sun set very quickly, dyeing the dry desert sands around Talas a bloody red. The place that Li Jinglong had sketched out was a dried river valley. When the group arrived, Mo Rijin was starting a fire in the valley. There were even a few brick and mortar houses scattered about in the river valley. Mo Rijin was wearing the black clothes of the Abbasid troops, and he had a scimitar belted to his waist. He whistled at them, and after they confirmed that they were not in danger, the group sat down and huddled around the campfire. Who are you? Mo Rijin asked suspiciously, suddenly realizing that there was one extra. Chen Feng, how did you end up following us? Chen Feng hurried to duck behind Yu Zhou. Li Jinglong came rushing over and was greatly shocked at that. He said angrily, Feng er. Yu Zhou hurriedly cupped his fist to greet Li Jinglong, and after Hung Jun explained what had happened, Li Jinglong thanked Yu Zhou, before saying, let's eat dinner first. Mo Rijin had caught a wild boar. Hung Jun had eaten too many bing recently, and when he smelled the scent of meat, he wondered, why is it that Mo Rijin can catch wild boar no matter where he goes? After Li Jinglong divided out the portions, he said, we've found where Atai went. The situation is very dire. He's been captured, and he's currently locked up in Tala city. Ashinakayan let out a long sigh and scrubbed a hand down his face. Tomorrow at noon, Aman will return to Talas. Bayat has already arrived, Li Jinglong explained. We chased him to this point, before we changed our clothes and snuck into the city. When he got to this point, he suddenly stopped talking, studying Yu Zhou suspiciously. At that moment, Yu Zhou was holding some salt, sprinkling it over a piece of meat Hung Jun had in his hand. The two of them were sitting together, very naturally. Hung Jun. The atmosphere suddenly quieted for a bit, before Li Jinglong continued as if nothing had happened. We saw Bayat. The golden sun ring was on his hand, but he didn't seem to know what he had. Where's the sacred flame ring? Ashinakayan asked. It was taken away as well, Mo Rijin explained. Tomorrow at noon, after Aman arrives, Bayat will summon the divine blade, and in front of the entire city of Talas, he will destroy the sacred artifact, the sacred flame ring. He will then execute Atai. We've stolen back all the rest of his things. Li Jinglong opened up a cloth pouch, which held Atai's godly hurricane fan inside, as well as his ice, fire, lightning, and earth rings. No way, Qiu Yangxi murmured. Even with all these, he got captured. In Barzan, did Aman make him drink something? Li Jinglong asked Ashinakayan. That cup of wine. Ashinakayan was instantly stunned. Li Jinglong replied, he had evidently been poisoned then, yet he didn't realize it. Instead, he got close to General Barzan, but just as he was about to snatch the golden sun ring, the poison's effects kicked in and almost cost him his life. Everyone was silent for a moment. Ashinakayan then said, let me be the one to deal with Aman. I'm much better now. Don't be hasty, Mo Rijin replied. We have almost 9 Shishin left to go. They'll only announce the execution tomorrow at noon, after Aman returns to Talas. Capturing the last scion of the Isai clan was an earth-shaking matter for the entire Abbasid nation. Baghdad had given the command for him to be executed in Talas. At the same time, they would, in front of everyone, destroy the most sacred ring of the Zoroastrian religion, and thus make the religion vanish for good. That's the ring that Zoroaster himself wore when he was alive, Ashinakayan exclaimed. That's impossible. Li Jinglong shrugged. I don't know what this conflict between you all will result in, but Bayat has rushed over from Baghdad, bringing with him the divine blade. He's preparing to pit it against the sacred flame ring and see which one is the stronger. Maybe it won't break. but I imagine that no matter what the outcome is, Atai will not be able to escape alive. Chu Yangzi pondered for a moment, before saying, this is similar to the mutual destruction that occurred between Buddhist and Daoist artifacts. Though these types of situations were exceedingly rare throughout history, in the end, it came down to the strength of the artifacts' wielders, as well as the origins of the artifacts. Ashinakayang remained silent. Lu Su added, it's possible. After all, Atai wasn't wearing the sacred flame ring, and Ba'at was wielding the divine blade. Lu Su spared him some face by not stating the facts as baldly as he could have. Li Jinglong added, by my request, the White Falcon was sent out to keep watch over Amon's troops. After he thought he had dealt with Kayang, he returned to Baghdad. Now, he's rushing back to Talas. Tomorrow, we will split into 2 groups. Li Jinglong began to assign tasks to each group. One group would head along the path that linked Baghdad to Talas to stop Amon. The other one would be in charge of secretly sneaking into the execution grounds to save Atai. At the same time, they would steal the Golden Sun Ring. Whether or not they could be recognized as successors was one thing, they could figure that out after they snatched it first. Li Jinglong's arrangements were meticulous and well thought out, and none of them were worried about Atai any longer. After hashing out the details, they all went off on their own. That left Li Jinglong, Hong Jun, Yu Zhou, and Chen Feng. Could I trouble you to look after my child? Li Jinglong asked, rising to his feet. Hong Jun, let's go resolve another issue. At this time, Chu Yangzi was standing in the shelter of the river gully. He first peeled away the talisman placed on top of the burlap sack that held the drought fiend, before then emptying the bag and dumping the drought fiend out. The drought fiend woke. It opened its eyes, staring fixedly at Li Jinglong. End chapter. Tianbao Fu Yao Lu. Chapter 201. Killing with a borrowed knife. The exorcists all scattered, and though they weren't right next to them, they were still filled with wariness, ready in case the drought fiend exploded into action at any moment. Lu Su stood near the ruined houses in the river valley, while Morigin was off to his side, bathing. From afar, he glanced briefly at them. Nothing bad will happen, Lu Su said. I used the dreamscape to make him calm down slightly. Lu Su's dreams were the best method to deal with corpse ghosts and the like. Back in the day, when Lu Su had been possessed by the devil heart, all members of the ghost tribe ranked below the king of the corpse ghosts had no way to fend him off, and all of them found themselves trapped in his nightmares. Using the same method, he had forced the drought fiend to dream for an entire day. Even with such a powerful Yaogwai, the resentful aura hanging around it had lessened quite a bit because of that. Let's have a chat, Li Jinglong said earnestly. You and I are not acquainted, and before we set out, the king of the corpse ghosts that fell in battle even gave us a tip that after we arrived in the Aral Sea region, we should seek your help. Why was it then, that without a single word, you attacked us instead? Hung Jun pulled out the jade that the corpse ghost king had handed him, and after a single glance, the drought fiend's withered face began to twitch with a certain kind of emotion. It was him. The drought fiend was very tall, and in this moment, since he was bound by the Yao binding rope, he had no choice but to sit with his legs slightly spread out. The pitch-black skin of his chest was stretched over his ribs. Li Jinglong asked, has Hung Jun offended you in any way? What have you come here to do? The drought fiend had recovered its cold, indifferent demeanor. As if it knew that it couldn't struggle out of the exorcist's control for now, it was no longer acting as arrogantly as it had been previously. Li Jinglong did not hide anything from him either. Instead, he briefly explained that they were seeking an artifact, and he also laid out what had happened after Atai and Ashinakayang returned to Talas. Without saying a single word, the drought fiend listened to everything he said. So you are the new Yao King, the drought fiend said darkly. Hung Jun nodded and said, Senior, I. In that moment, the drought fiend suddenly burst into action. Li Jinglong immediately shouted, "Watch out!" But even as he spoke, the drought fiend moved like lightning to a stop in front of Hung Jun and in the blink of an eye, revealed his sharp teeth as he moved to bite Hung Jun's throat. Thankfully, Li Jinglong's reaction was even faster than that, and he pushed Hung Jun aside. Despite that, however, the drought fiend's sharp teeth slashed across Li Jinglong's arm, sending fresh blood spurting forth. The drought fiend had some thousands of years' worth of cultivation under its belt, and the Yao binding rope was not quite enough to hold it in place. The corpse poison that emanated from all over its body only made the issue worse, and the bloody injury on Li Jinglong's arm immediately turned black. This angered Hung Jun, and he instantly exploded into action, punching one fist ferociously at the drought fiend's face, sending him falling backwards onto the ground. "How exactly have I offended you?" Hung Jun roared. Li Jinglong staggered. All the exorcists, upon hearing Hung Jun's enraged shouts, immediately gathered around. Lu Su once again drew on the power of the dreamscape to force the drought fiend to sleep for a while, but Li Jinglong waved him off. Hung Jun immediately gave him an antidote and bandaged his wound, before Li Jinglong said, "All of you, go back." The drought fiend struggled into a sitting position, watching Li Jinglong fixedly. "How many more sons and daughters of the Yao tribes are you trying to kill?" Li Jinglong froze. Hung Jun protested, "I'm the Yao king. How could I go and kill my own people? Is that truly the case?" The drought fiend's eyes were filled with hatred. "Then how do you explain what happened to the snake of Mount Ba?" Hung Jun had no response for that. It was Li Jinglong who explained instead. The Ba snake and Hung Jun's father, Mahamayuri, had a history of grudges and debts. That was a personal matter. How can private conflicts between Yao be on the same level as that? "You are a traitor to your own kind," the drought fiend said slowly, glaring at Hung Jun. "You and Direnja's successor are working hand in hand to sell out your people for the sake of glory. If this continues, the Yao tribes of the Central Plains will be doomed for eternity." When he heard that, Hung Jun grew even more infuriated, but just as he was about to fire back a counter, Li Jinglong pressed one hand to his knee, indicating that he should cool his head. "Someone is trying to drive a wedge between us," Li Jinglong said darkly. "Who gave you this information?" But the drought fiend simply let out a cold chuckle. When Hung Jun heard these words, he suddenly remembered how Qing Xiang had acted while they were in the sacred land, and a deep swell of horror rose in him. Was Qing Xiang trying to take advantage of them being away from the Central Plains and use the drought fiend to kill Hung Jun? That's impossible. A chill ran down Hung Jun's spine at that thought, and the world spun around him as he found himself at a complete loss. He forced himself to calm a little, before saying to the drought fiend, "That's not what happened. Hear me out, senior. I am currently being restrained by you," the drought fiend said, smiling coldly. "If you truly see me as a senior, is this how you would treat me?" Naturally, Hung Jun could not untie him. If they started fighting, things would never be resolved. "Who told you I was a traitor?" Hung Jun asked darkly. "Tell me." Li Jinglong and the others often saw Hung Jun as a kid, and when they interacted on a daily basis, they never treated him as a Yao king. It wasn't until this moment, when Hung Jun found himself infuriated, that he displayed a little of the intimidation of a ruler. He stood there, an aura of intimidation about him as the power of the phoenix and the peacock bore down on the drought fiend. Though the drought fiend was a powerful Yaogwai that appeared in prehistoric times, he had never been recognized by the heavens and the earth, so he was still a little lacking when facing down dragons and phoenixes, Kylin, and turtles. The power of the true flame immediately suppressed the drought fiend's aura, and he leaned back involuntarily. When facing down a Yaogwai of a higher tier than his own, that feeling of terror stemmed solely from instinct. It could not be controlled by either cultivation or temperament. "I don't know." The drought fiend fought hard to control himself and not show his fear, but the tremors in his hoarse voice betrayed him. Your Central Plains Yao tribe sent out a messenger who informed me that the boss snake had perished, and the new Yao king was scheming with the exorcists, hoping to annihilate all members of our tribes. Hung Jun asked darkly, and what about the messenger? They left, the drought fiend replied. And they also reminded me that if I wish to reforge my physical form, I will need to consume your blood and flesh, solely because you have the power that the phoenix left within your body. Li Jinglong asked, which tribe did the messenger belong to? The drought fiend replied, it was night, and I was sleeping within my coffin, so I did not see this person. Hung Jun sucked in a deep breath and pulled back the intimidating pressure of his power. A deep sense of helplessness rose out of his heart. He didn't want to hear any more explanations, so he got up and walked away. The exorcists stared at the drought fiend, before they all dispersed as well, leaving Li Jinglong and the drought fiend to stare silently at each other. The moon rose. Across this endless river plain, it cast its light across thousands of li, shining across the vast lands of Asia Minor. Hung Jun sat on a rooftop, staring into the distance. The only Yaogwai that could travel to this place from thousands of li away were those of the avian tribe, and the avian tribe was under Qing Xiang's jurisdiction. For them to want to kill him here. Actually, I thought about this before, whether I should warn you about this ahead of time or not. Li Jinglong's voice spoke from down below. He then clambered up onto the tiles of the flat roof below, using those to propel himself up. Hung Jun didn't speak. He simply looked out into the distance, lost in his thoughts. All of the Arctic gerfalcons that serve as messengers are Qing Xiang's subordinates, Li Jinglong said. I suspect that they all received the orders that night, to scatter all of us first, before letting the drought fiend take you away. This was a trap, Hung Jun. Though I don't want to put it that way, with the situation as it is today, I have no choice but to say it. Hung Jun and Li Jinglong exchanged a glance. The situation was already very clear. The Arctic gerfalcons Qing Xiang sent out were very fast, and in just a few days, they had already scoped out the situation. He had then decided to use this opportunity to deal with as many of the exorcists as he could. If Yu Zhou hadn't suddenly appeared, the drought fiend might have already succeeded. Am I doing very terribly? Hung Jun suddenly asked. Li Jinglong pondered for a moment, before shaking his head. No, Hung Jun. You are not at fault. I simply didn't realize that Qing Xiang was so antagonistic towards us humans. It's all my fault. Yangtze has already reminded me several times about this. Hung Jun replied, I want to be alone for a bit. And saying that, he leapt off the roof, leaving Li Jinglong's side. Hung Jun. Li Jinglong called after him, but Hung Jun had already walked away. He's found out. Chu Yangtze asked, from next to the house. Li Jinglong let out a helpless sigh. Chu Yangtze was very surprised, and he remarked, I didn't think it would be so fast. Li Jinglong replied, what must happen will always happen sooner or later. Perhaps Chongming had foreseen this long ago, and that was also the reason why he tried to stop Hung Jun and I from being together in the beginning. Out with the old and in with the new, Chu Yangtze replied earnestly. That has always been the will of the heavens, and no one can stop this from happening. You are simply standing at a crossroads right now. Compared to this, I'm more suspicious of that guy, Yu Zhou. And as he spoke, he glanced towards the campfire. Chen Feng had already fallen asleep in Yu Zhou's arms, both of them sitting in front of the fire. Li Jinglong frowned. He knows quite a bit, despite coming here for the sake of protecting Hung Jun. It's really strange, I've never seen a person like this before. Hung Jun lay on the stone bed inside the house. When he had entered, he had found that Li Jinglong had made preparations beforehand, despite them only planning to stay for a single night. He had even spread a blanket across the top. His exorcist companions had also silently left 2 rooms available, one for Li Jinglong and himself, and the other for Mo Rijin and Lu Su to spend the night. Hung Jun lay on the bed, tossing and turning. The reality of Qing Xiang wanting to kill him was devastating to him. If it had been any of his subordinates, Yu Zayun or even the corpse ghost king, he wouldn't be feeling as much sorrow and as upset as he was now. He had never had any relatives by his side when he was growing up, just Chongming and Qing Xiang. Chongming was his adoptive father, and Qing Xiang was like an uncle to him. The first time he had learned to read, the first time he had discussed Yaoguai, meridians, or martial arts, most of these were thanks to Qing Xiang's instruction. The wonders of the human realm had also been described to him by Qing Xiang. On this night, he remembered countless scenes of him and Qing Xiang keeping each other company. But now, Qing Xiang actually wanted to kill him. A wild wind gusted across the plains, and Hung Jun squeezed his eyes shut. Thankfully, Mara had long since left him, otherwise, in the moment that he had learned of this, devil Qi would have filled the world around him, and there would be no way to control it. The truth was cruel, and it stunned him and left him feeling even more helpless than he had been in the moment he was separated from his parents by their deaths. You are the prince of the Yao tribes. Qing Xiang's voice seemed to echo in his ear, and Hung Jun couldn't help but curl up into a shaking ball on the bed, breathing in this icy air. He didn't even know how he was supposed to face the Yao tribes of the sacred land when he went back, nor could he imagine how Qing Xiang felt towards him now. This caused him to feel as if he had been abandoned by his own people. Breezes snuck into the room from all sides, and it was even icier because it was late autumn, so that chill engulfed him instantly. The faintest sound of a door opening sounded, and Li Jinglong pushed the door open and came inside, asking quietly, "Are you asleep?" Hung Jun didn't respond, so Li Jinglong got into bed and hugged Hung Jun from behind. In that moment, Hung Jun felt a little more settled, perhaps because of the power of the heart lamp, or perhaps because of the warmth of Li Jinglong's body. He no longer felt as lonely as he had before, and he shut his eyes. He was very, very tired, and he slipped into dreams. Ever since the nightmares of all realms had left him, he had never had another nightmare. But this night was the sole exception. That powerlessness and sorrow that even the heart lamp couldn't expel fully had filled his heart. That caused him to dream of the great pen, its body wreathed in black qi. When it spread its wings, they were wide enough to block out the sky, and an endless wave of devil flames engulfed the world. Its eyes were fixed on Hung Jun, but from behind, a powerful arm grabbed him. Li Jinglong appeared by his side, and he said quietly, "Don't be afraid." Li Jinglong lifted his hands, and the light of the heart lamp poured out, fending off that tidal wave of devil flames. Amidst that bright light, Hung Jun opened his eyes. "You're up." Sunlight shone into the room. Hung Jun felt as if his entire body ached, and he turned back to glance at Li Jinglong. The light of the morning sun illuminated the inside of the room. "We have to go save Atai," Hung Jun said. "Don't worry. We still have time," Li Jinglong said. "Hung Jun, I have something I want to say to you." The two of them were still in the same sleeping pose they had been last night, and when Hung Jun thought about everything that had happened last night, he replied, "I don't want to talk about it right now." Li Jinglong startled, before nodding. "All right. Hung Jun, no matter what, remember that everyone will always be on your side." Hung Jun turned back and looked at Li Jinglong, his eyes filled with some unknown sorrow. He knew in his heart that no matter how many things were troubling him, Li Jinglong would help him resolve them, but this matter alone was one that no one could change the outcome of. Qing Xiang, Yaojin Palace, and all sorts of past influences, those were all where he came from. These were the most important parts of his life that had been engraved into him. The exorcists had already packed their bags and were preparing to set out. The drought fiend had been left by the roadside, and he had been sealed up again. "Can you subdue him?" Li Jinglong asked. Qiu Yangxi shook his head. "Do you know why he became like this?" Everyone gathered together, but Hung Jun remained quiet. "Because of Zoroaster," Qiu Yangxi explained. The drought fiend, in the past, had his physical form burned away by the sacred flames. Last night, Li Jinglong still held out hope that Qiu Yangxi could persuade the drought fiend. In the beginning, everyone thought that the drought fiend had simply been duped, and as long as they told him the truth, he could even end up helping them out. But now, it was evident that this was impossible, and with such a large battle looming on the horizon, they couldn't waste too much time on him. Lu Su resealed the drought fiend away in the dreamscape and Qiu Yangxi plastered talismans to him. I will need to expend a portion of my magic to maintain the dreamscape, Lu Su said. I will have to split my focus. Then I'll leave it to you, Li Jinglong said to Morajin. Morajin, Lu Su, and Ashinakayan would set out together. They were in charge of stopping Amon's troops, so it wasn't very dangerous. The three of us will go the other way, Qiu Yangxi said. This. Yu Xiang, the way I see it, why don't you? Are you all right? Yu Zhou suddenly asked Hung Jun. Hung Jun shook his head, before nodding. What's wrong? Chen Feng had just woken up, and he rubbed at his eyes as he asked the question, before moving to hug Hung Jun's leg. Hung Jun took his hand and indicated that he shouldn't ask any more questions. Li Jinglong originally wanted Yu Zhou and Chen Feng to be in charge of escorting the drought fiend, but Chen Feng insisted on coming along, so Li Jinglong said, you two can come along with us. Though they had all come to an agreement, they were still apprehensive as they looked towards Hung Jun, worried that his emotions were still in a flustered. Hung Jun summoned up some spirit to say, let's go rescue Atai first. Everything else can come later. With that, the group bid each other farewell in the river valley, each setting off for their destinations. End chapter.